We are living in someone's false ARG. This is what the Great Reset is. They're just creating what they want the next story to be. And we also are seeing the revealing right now to understand how this realm works so that we can walk through it with greater awareness and consciousness. So then going back to the whole thing of why does mysticism work? Why is synchronicity important? Why is looking at rivers, looking at where you are important? Because that is a baseline reality which is deeper than the ARG. You are going to connect to something. That is the human experience.
No, because we can't really go back in and pretend like we just said hello.
I assumed we were recording.
Well, that is my fault. I apologize to the listeners, but now we are recording. Indeed.
Hopped on this call. And so my question to you was, what's going on? It's been about a week since we spoke.
Yeah, well, not much has gone on this week in comparison to the week before, but I have continued the sort of book magnetic, I don't know what to call it, maybe you have a better word for it, but it seems like there's this magnetism where once we get one book, and it only happens with Tara, like my whole life I've been buying books, and this hasn't started until I met Tara. And what I'm talking about is this connection, this link that's being formed between books. The first book that I can maybe say is a part of this is Dancing the Wheel, Working with the Medicine Wheel. And in that book, they describe a practice of creating a circle cross with two lines out of stones, and you use 36 stones, and each stone represents has a different characteristic that it adds to the wheel. And that wheel that you build in your backyard or you're on an altar or wherever it may be is sort of like your representation of the world, right?
Let me ask you a question real quick. So each stone has a different quality,
right?
Correct?
Right.
How are those, do you define those qualities? Is there a set list of qualities? Where does that come from? And how do the stones get linked to those qualities?
Yeah, great question. So there is a rubric, so to speak. And the way it works is you start with the creator stone in the middle, and then you place the Earth Mother, Father, Son, Grandmother, Moon. Those would be the first four stones: Creator, Earth, Sun, Moon. And then it goes into Turtle, Frog, Thunderbird, Butterfly, Waboose, Waboon, Shauna.
All right, well, hold on. Let me stop you before we go into the third layer. So between layers 1 and 2, are there 5 stones or 4 stones?
Well, for the visual side of it, imagine one stone in the center of a circle, and
that should be the Godstone, the creator stone, correct?
Right. And
then you should have the 4 directions.
Right.
And so there should be 4 stones.
So the picture shows, the first 5 stones are kind of circling around the first stone you place, and then from there you kind of build out.
So 5 stones go around the circle, the center circle stone, or is the 5th stone including the
8?
Because I don't, and this is my thought with this line of questioning. I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think there's a knowing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so I don't think like this is the right way or that is the right way. I think that what is the right way is that you understand what it is that you are doing, you being like, me, you, or like anyone who's listening. Like,
right.
This is how you create like your actual ceremonies, how you're not like doing dogma, replicating something, but you're inspired. And then you understand, like, you have a logic system in terms of what you're working with, what energies you're working with. This is a great model. This is a great model. So
right,
and you or 5 around.
Well, you make a good point, though. It's like this is not supposed to be, a new dogma. This is like you practice completing their version of the medicine wheel, and then as you integrate this practice into your life, maybe you swap out the turtle stone for your own pet dog, or instead of the wisdom stone, you might have more focus on love. So there, I agree with that.
I would even go, like, I'm looking at it kind of like the wheel itself, like, which is a purposeful circle placed of stone on the earth, with there are two lines going from through the center, which are perpendicular with one another. So 4 line segments off the center, or 2 lines, however you want to think it. But that is kind of like an infrastructure in terms of connecting to the natural world. And no matter what you do with that, like, it's an infrastructure. So there's first that level of understanding. This isn't the only infrastructure, but it's like, it's probably a universal, tested and tried sort of thing, which humanity has done in the past. And then the next level is then, if we look at that as the first layer, and then the second layer is then they have the meaning, like, why you're doing it. And that could still be infrastructure, like lining up the lines in the 4 directions, or maybe you're lining it up to something geographical that or geological in your area that is visual. Like, there's no right or wrong, just knowing what you're doing and why you're doing and what, the 4 directions may mean to you and so forth. And then comes the meaning of, like, okay, the center stone is creator stone. Like, that makes the most amount of sense to me. Like, that, where does it all begin?
Right.
That's what this represents. This represents where it all begins. And then you go, like, okay, what are then my next layers? What speaks to me? And so what I really liked what you were describing was this kind of, like, what I pictured, ancestral tie, mother, father, when you're talking about the moon, and I forget the other ones, but you're beginning to, like, that's what you're linking your connective vehicle to. But it doesn't have to be that. But that is, like, it makes a lot of sense why that would be. But so go on. So you were saying, like, the layer after that is where it starts to get even more specific,
right,
in terms of qualities.
Right. The diagram they have laid out, you would be facing the north when you do this, and you would place the creator stone, and then in a tight circle immediately around that creator stone, you would place the next 7 stones. So you end up with one circle in the middle of a small circle of 7 other stones. And then from the 4 directions, you would place 3 stones in each direction, north, south, east, west, or, front, back, left, right. And then around those 4 points or 4 lines that you just, plotted with the 3 stones moving away from the center, you would connect all 4 of those lines around with 16 stones the same size as the creator stone in the middle. So the ones that are kind of like connecting the middle portions of the circle are fairly smaller, the way this diagram has it. And, the intention is to use minerals or whatever stones are in your yard and to create a sort of visual meditation through which you can facilitate a connection between the earth and the sky and you in the middle. And this book is really fascinating. That's like only one dimension to this book. It's really kind of like a complete medicine wheel workbook from Sun Bear, who's a pretty well-known Native American author. And, my point bringing this up was to show how it seems like these books, this one in particular, but specifically the books that Tara and I have found together, are really leading us down a certain like path. Like you can see a clear connection between, you know, one book and the other, and a sort of narrative is forming.
So, I, I'm so inspired by this idea. I love hearing this. So, can we talk a little bit more so about like the actual practice?
Yeah, when you say actual practice, do you mean in the Dancing with the Wheel book, or do you mean just like the overall?
Doing it. So like whether it's done dancing, you know, following a recipe, or improvising your own. I mean, I'm thinking like, you know, what would also be really cool, and maybe this is covered in the book as well, is, you know, scale is interesting. So that's, you know, you're working with a pretty big, how big would you say, the diameter of the circle would be? Like from end to end, from opposite point to opposite point, 20 feet?
No, I would say it's all dependent on you, the creator. So if you wanted to make a big one like that, 20 feet for sure. The one that Tara and I made at our old place was very small, but it was made with, you know, hand-sized minerals.
What's very small?
Like the size of maybe a foot by a foot on a table, you know, like on a kitchen table.
So you're talking about maybe like stones and minerals that are maybe the size of a digit of your finger? Yeah.
We created one with sort of like handheld crystals that you would get at the mineral shops and whatnot. Nothing like what we pulled out of the Susquehanna that day.
Okay. So you're right. Like the scale could be played with, but where I was going to go with it, and it sounds like you probably accomplished this as well, is particularly if you're going to do a larger one, is once that you know, I'll use the word portal or maybe even connective tissue. I'll say connective tissue. That's a little bit different. Of what is created, you know, that has a quality, you know, just through intention and action, and purposeful. Yeah, I guess that's intention. Purposeful movement. Like you've created something, and then, you know, we can look at our natural world, or not our natural world. We can look at the world we live in as a model of the natural world, or at least more universal laws. So like what we do in our false reality matrix is electricity, artificial electricity is created, and then it is stored in a battery. And then you can use that. It gives you more freedom to move about. Well, that's a universal truth, I would suggest. And so as you created that quality, you then have something much more personal. Like, you know, this is where you get into the nature of you know, some specific minerals, whether that be like a quartz crystal or something like that, but something which holds a quality, something which can be programmed. And so you program it to capture, you know, you put it in the center of your circle, and you program it to capture the quality which was just created. It's an energetic, you know, it's a blueprint. And so then when you have that in your battery, in your mineral battery, and you carry that with you outside of that wheel, you always have a literal and material link. And that doesn't mean that without a material link, you're still not linked. But when you have something which is material, it's a tool. It aids in the process. And so thinking about like these circles is very, you know, a practice which you can do to really like kind of ground yourself outside of the story which we've been all given. Like, you know, this is a great, really like fun, creative, interesting practice which anyone can do.
Yeah, that's, you know, why it kind of stood out to us. We're in this small town in the northeastern half of New York State, and we were looking for an apartment, which we still are. Haven't quite found the right one yet, but we were looking for an apartment in Pines Plains, or Pine Plains, New York. And, after finding out the apartment we were looking at that day was very, very, not where we wanted to live, let's just say that. And we decided, okay, well, let's make the best of this. We're kind of far out of our way here, so we went to a bookstore. That's where we found Dancing with the Wheel. Now, I say that because the second book that links this kind of journey that I'm hoping to get into here was Spirit in the Zone, which is a book I've spoke to you about before on this show. Glenn Kreisberg writes about a number of different topics, but in one chapter, he kind of offhand mentions the Handbook Ley Line, which we talked about last episode and probably the episode before that. So that became immediately fascinating. Much like this workbook, we were able to explore our local area with more information and, see what's actually out here. And when you're dealing with ley lines, it's like, yeah, okay, sure, like, that Freemason building is cool and whatnot, it looks strange, but then you find out that the Freemason building is built on the ley line, and then you find out, oh wait, it's one of many Freemason lodges built on this ley line. Schools, even a prison, one of the biggest prisons in the state, are all built on this ley line. Now, talking about that ley line so much, you recommended Peter Champois' book, which I ordered, and that became another really great addition with the Gaia Matrix. And unfortunately, no, the Handbook line is not on his map of ley lines. I think we talked about that last week, but there is the Peacemaker Ley Line. And you asked me about the Peacemaker Ley Line, maybe because it was, the most memorable of the ley lines, or just stood out to you when you happened to look through this book. But I found out that the Peacemaker Ley Line is very significant, and it taught me a couple things that I didn't know that kind of connect back to like the Williamsburg conversation that we were having, and possibly more. So the cultural corridor called the Peacemaker Ley was named after the native prophet Degana Wida, who introduced a code of life to the tribes of the Iroquois Nation with the help of his spokesman, Hiawatha. So Hiawatha is the guy who inspired the Constitution of the United States. The indigenous tribes, you hear about how the founding fathers studied with the indigenous tribes, and that's how they created their constitution with the inspiration from the Iroquois Nation. Well, that happened along the Peacemaker line, and one of the many traditions that Hiawatha and Deganewida inspired was the tradition of the Longhouse, which was like a gathering place for many different tribes. Usually elder, very respected member of the tribe would have a longhouse built for them, and then that would be sort of like their meeting place where they would have meetings and whatnot. And the reason why this was so significant for me is because here in Connecticut there's a legend of Lake Warramog and Chief Warramog having the biggest, most splendid, artistically decorated for its time longhouse in all of the East Coast. So, the more I dig into these books, and there's a couple more that have come up since the Gaia Matrix, but the more I dig into these books, the more I'm finding those, as we discussed previously, those kind of hindsight moments where you realize like, oh, I've heard of this before, but not in this context. And it really just, it feels cool, and B, it's kind of, it's hard to relay, you kind of just have to be there and experience it. But yeah, the longhouses are...
So,
go ahead.
Can I ask you a bunch of questions?
Yeah. Well, and the
right,
Peacemaker line, like you said last week, I forgot to bring this part up. It is aligned with Cooperstown, New York, in the Baseball Hall of Fame, the highest, most northern point of the Susquehanna River. So, yeah, you were correct about that.
Yeah. So the first question I have is, you said Hiawatha was the interpreter of whom?
Hiawatha was the spokesman. Yep. Of and I could totally be pronouncing this wrong, but it's Deganawida, Deganawidah.
Okay. I'm going to refer to that individual just as DW, so you know who I'm talking about. So DW, and you may not know the answer to this, but these are the questions which I'm starting to have. Is like, is spokesperson the same as an interpreter? Who is this DW? Why did he need a spokesperson? Why could not he speak for himself? Or assuming it's a he, maybe it's a female. So that is what I would be interested in. Is this a person coming from outside? Why is this new to the Iroquois Nation? Where did this come from? Like, I find that very fascinating. Do you have any thoughts or any more insight along those lines?
No, other than what I can Google and find about him. But it seems like the word that we're calling DW is also, it means the great peacemaker.
The great peacemaker.
Within the Iroquois language.
Gotcha. And so, not to go down a tangent, but this reminds me of a book, and I think next time I see you, I'm going to let you look at it. And I think it's I can't recall the title, but the author's last name, I believe, is Hansen, Hansen. And that name will be significant in a moment. But what the book is it is a collection of indigenous stories of the Peacemaker.
Wow.
And it's throughout all of North America and down through Mesoamerica and South America. So, and it's organized, like it'll say, where the story is from what people, and then it will retell the story. And so there are a couple things that are fascinating about this. So the first thing is, as I don't want to forget to go back to us, but the Hiawatha story, as you told it, parallels another story called the Conasatego story, but we'll go back to that. So I want to go and say we've got this Peacemaker connection. And so my question was who is this Peacemaker? Who is one layer beneath it? And so we see this particularly in North America, South America, and Middle America is there's a Peacemaker narrative. Now, the author of this book, I have a first edition book of this, which is interesting. First editions are always good because it's before they've been edited for whatever reason. But nonetheless, so it's a first edition book. It came out in 1963. So it was written with that sort of context. It's very important to understand kind of like the cultural feel as information is being presented, because that gives you more insight. So there's that. And then it is written from a perspective that the Peacemaker is actually Jesus. So the author is I'm assuming, is a practicing, or was a believer. And so I'm not saying that whether it's the right belief or the wrong belief. I'm just saying that for context. So the author is writing the book from that context, that these stories are all proof or demonstration that Jesus came to the Americas.
I cannot. I'm like jumping out of my seat right now because folks. Well, I just want to say we don't prepare for this. We don't tell each other what we're going to be talking about. We're just doing this off the top of the head. So go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
So okay, all right. So the third thing to know about this author. And when I first read it, it was the name read as a male. Like, my interpretation was a male wrote this story, or wrote this book. And then you come to find that it was a female. And so she is the daughter of I want to say probably a geologist, like a teaching geologist, and he is the guy who came up with the tectonic plate theory. So our understanding of how Earth works right now on the basic level is that we have these tectonic plates and they move about. And so this is the guy who came up with that theory. That theory is more or less presented in all of our education systems as being fact. Whether it's fact or not, I don't know. But this is where that idea came from. So prior to him, like, that was not how people understood the workings of Earth. But so the point I'm trying to make is she comes from a certain level of academic rigor. You can just imagine what the household was like, and what the belief system, and what the father kind of talked about, his perspective as he raised his children. But then we also want to say the author of the book was an academic in her own right, whereas I think she had 3 PhDs, including I want to say indigenous cultures, like an anthropology degree with that concentration. She had a PhD in ancient Egyptology and something else. Like, this woman is no slouch. So even when you hear me saying when you talk about something like Jesus, when you bring that into the discussion, it can very easily in our modern world create a very quick response, whether you're in alignment with it or if you're no, that's ridiculous or what have you. That can create a response. But I want to point out that this woman, whatever her spiritual beliefs may have been, she also comes at it from this very science-based sort of perspective. So that's what made that book so fascinating to me. And then also the commentary, in addition to the stories of what the viewpoint was to indigenous culture in the early 60s, when you're still seeing all of these cowboy and Indian films are still being part of the mainstream narrative. But this is coming from a woman who has a PhD in anthropology. So she's not necessarily underneath that guy. So to me, this book is so interesting because it is a snapshot of that perspective. And it was, I don't want to go down the specifics yet, but I wanted to bring that in, and we should discuss this book later, because I think that it's tied in directly to this Peacemaker line that, as you said, for whatever reason, that was one of the many ley lines that popped up to my mind. I don't know why I said it. And then it resonates with you. I was immediately thinking of the P's when you were talking about the place, the apartment where you and Tara went, and then the P comes up again. So it's we're certainly tapped into something. And as you said to the listeners at home, this is how the sausage is being made. I don't know what you're going to say next, but my guess is what I'm saying is hitting something of meaning to you. So I'm going to hand it back to you. I want to hear what you guys said.
Three layers. Okay. So let me break down the last one, because it's the freshest. So you said the P's, you thought of the P's, and I don't know how much of this we're familiar or made each other familiar with, but Tara, since I've met her, a big theme in our relationship has been the Pleiadians, who kind of go by the P's on their, I guess you can call it a podcast, but it's not really a podcast. You have to buy each episode, and it's kind of like Barbara Marciniak channeling the Pleiadians. Well, the first book I ever gave Tara, when I was just kind of hoping she would go out with me a couple years ago, was a book by Barbara Marciniak, coincidentally. And so, the Pleiadians are very significant to her, and somewhat significant to me, and more so since we're together, because I'm more interested in it because she's so interested in them. So the P's, yes, that I don't want that to distract me too much, but it does connect, because so we find the Gaia Matrix book, and just like I told you last week, that brought us up to Shelburne Falls. and we followed his ley line called the Chakra Ley, which goes from south to north up to Shelburne Falls. And in Shelburne Falls, we found a book called The Manitou, the Sacred Landscape of New England Native Civilization. So while this book doesn't mention ley lines very much, they do talk about the Shakers. And they talk about this time when, indigenous cultures, religions, and the Puritans and the Shakers and the Quakers and the Muslims and the Socinians, whoever they are, and the Papists and the Romanists, as they were called. I'm almost certain those are Roman Catholics. So all these different groups were in the United States, specifically Massachusetts at this time. And, the big famous... The big famous, story about the Native Americans is, why we have Thanksgiving, right? The European settlers landed at Plymouth Rock, and that began the sort of benevolent friendship between the indigenous people and the colonists. Well, we both know that story is not that simple. And what's interesting about Plymouth Rock is it is on the Peacemaker Line, and it goes and connects the Peacemaker Line. Well, the Peacemaker Line connects the Plymouth Rock all the way to Niagara Falls, the Great Lakes, this area that is very, very spiritual and sacred to the Iroquois Nation. And I should correct myself, because the Great Peacemaker is not what Deganawita's name meant. It's actually, his name that they gave him out of respect instead of his proper name, right? So out of respect, they wouldn't say Deganawita, maybe because it's hard to pronounce, and instead called him the Great Peacemaker. And he's one of the founders of the Iroquois Confederacy. So this guy's very significant, and he comes from Onondaga, which is a lake in present-day Syracuse, New York, but it's also named that because that was a very sacred place to the indigenous peoples. Well, the Hammonasset Ley Line and the Peacemaker Ley Line, they meet at Onondaga Lake. So, for me, when I saw that connection just now while we were talking, I was like, boom, that's very significant. Have to bring that up. And then the second thing that made me really interested is this idea that, the author you're referring to, the woman, is talking about this kind of almost like indigenous prophet, right? Where the indigenous peoples are being converted to Christianity, and there's this sort of meeting in the middle where now what I would suspect is, and this is all speculation, but you have a group of people who are much more connected to the actual spiritual nature of what it means to be human. In my opinion, being connected to the land would give you maybe greater access to that in those realms. You have these people, almost like being converted in that time period to a new form of understanding that spiritual world, right? They're being given a whole new set of terms to understand that kind of new world, so to speak, the Christian world, right? And it's interesting that you bring this up, because I was just reading last night about the Puritans and the Shakers and how they interacted and what their interactions were like with the indigenous people. And, we talked about Yale before. I don't live too far from Yale. I worked not for Yale, but within a job that, was on campus. And I learned a lot about Yale. It was unsettling and sometimes and inspiring at others, but there's a character named Ezra Stiles who was the president of Yale College for some time in the 1700s. He lived from 1727 to 1759, and he was one of the most important recorders of indigenous culture in this area. There weren't many English speakers or English writers, very interested in that subject at the time. So with the prejudice that might, maybe we can get into that too, because that I think is an aspect of the whole noble, savage, kind of Christianized Indian theme, that whole world. But, we see in a guy like Ezra Stiles this point in time when, the men who founded this country, so to speak, you can see through Ezra Stiles maybe how they would have been more open to learning about the Iroquois Confederacy and then being inspired to incorporate those ideas into the Constitution. Because it says that Ezra Stiles, he was kind of conflicted. Obviously, he was amongst Christians and learning about Christianity, and he ended up becoming a deist, right? And a lot of men from American history are deists. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine. They were all deists, and he was, kind of in this underground theology scene within Yale, him and the other deists. And it was kind of around this same time when Armenianism, which has nothing to do with the present country of Armenia, but Armenianism, which was kind of like a rebut towards this really, really strict Calvinism that taught people that they could only do good things in the name of God. They were starting to get this idea like, well, people do good things and it's not necessarily in the name of God. You see this sort of, this really strict, rigid idea of God in the colonialists. And then on the transverse side, you see the indigenous cultures who live with God in the sense of like, their words are not symbols for ideas. The words in indigenous cultures' languages are the ideas themselves. So they're living through these ideas. They're not merely kind of like symbolically referring to them in the same way maybe Western consciousness, we're led to think Western consciousness would in this time period. So that to me kind of sheds light on why the indigenous cultures were kind of close to folks like the deists in a sense, because they had a common understanding of these supernatural powers existing in everything, combining the rational and the supernatural, without that sort of anthropocentricity that you have with Western culture. The indigenous cultures, they were just in it, and the deists were way more, close to that than the Puritans were, thus why they were able to appreciate some of these themes more deeply than maybe like the Puritans, who were kind of the majority at the time in certain areas. But then you see in a group like the Shakers, you see a pretty close relationship with the indigenous cultures, where they have more things in common than the average colonists. So here is where you see a lot of connections being formed. And funny enough, those communities, the Shaker communities, were on the Peacemaker Line in places that I don't think exist anymore. I'm pretty sure the Shaker community got, they sold their land and it's now owned by a Sufi mosque. But either way, this is kind of the theme, when a sacred place is given up, it sometimes gets just like repurposed by another religion.
Can you tell me about the Shakers' practice and or beliefs?
The Shakers?
Yeah.
Not
what do you know about the Shakers?
Not much. Not much more than I can Google for you right now.
So all right. So the Shakers, they shake. Is that is that an assumption that I can make? Is that how they got their name?
Yeah, they're the Shaking Quakers.
The Shaking Quakers. So why are they shaking? What are they doing?
I imagine they're doing like the what we see
Like a
now in the
dance?
South, like the tongue, the kind of trance-like behavior, going into a trance through movement.
Were the Shakers the celibate? They were celibate, right?
Yeah, and pacifists.
And pacifists, and they made exquisite furniture, correct?
And I think they still do. They just might not be as organized as they used to be, but yeah, their descendants still do. Yeah.
All right, okay, but you don't know much more about you're talking about their beliefs being closer to the natural world. Do you have any more on that?
Well, only little bits and pieces, because I will admit I'm not that prolific of a reader, Mike. I haven't made it completely through the Manitou book, but that is chapter 8, and I'm looking forward to it.
Gotcha. Okay. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
It's okay. But you can see just through the Shaking Quakers, like you can maybe see there's some shamanistic aspects to the Shakers' practices.
Well, I mean, and really where my interest was is the next show, which I'm doing with Emily, and we're going to have another guest on, and they're going to be talking a lot about dancing and how and what dancing means to them. Like Emily's like a techno dancer, but she takes it with this very kind of mystical perspective. And I'm not really certain what she's going to say, but where my mind is looking at the continuity of, like, whether we just want to call it dancing or movement within tapping into the natural world. Whether it's like, that's one thing about the Shakers. I'm like, okay, well, what do we know about the Shakers? Because thinking about like everything we know of indigenous culture and that dancing, everything which we know about dancing in like African cultures, like in all of these cultures, we can see this dancing. And so I'm like, okay, well, what is it? What is that actually doing? And that's so I'm excited for the conversation with Emily, because I want to hear what she's saying on a possibly universal practice that applied to a different sort of medium, being like modern computer generated music, or at least computer influenced music. So that's where my interest was coming from as it relates to that. Because I think there's something there. I think there's something really, and then also like just thinking about in my mind, the juxtaposition of what I'm imagining what Shakers are, because on the most basic level, it's surrendering the body to like wherever this movement is coming from. And, once it's more organized or more structured, then it moves into dance. But when I'm hearing shaking, like I'm thinking like the most basic, but like being total out of control and like thinking about shaking movements, but then comparing that to like incredibly conscious movements of like Qigong, of Eastern movement arts, and like how that is probably playing with a very similar type of energy, but in a very, very different way. And so that to me is really fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, that's why I wanted to touch on it, because it's this time in American history where, we have an impression that, the indigenous cultures, they only, we're just wiped out, which is not untrue, but there was a lot of integration that took place. And I don't think through that integration, everything was lost. Some things, like we see, were connected, and the Shakers, I think, helped preserve some of those maybe shamanistic practices that the indigenous peoples were practicing here. I mean, to the Spirit in the Stone book again, Glenn talks about how all of these places where indigenous peoples were doing powwows and getting together for ceremonies, would be named, with the prefix devils. So you have like Devil's Den and Devil's Tower and the Devil's Swamp and Devil's this and that, right? All over the map, and up the Hudson River. The Dutch saw a powwow going on while they were sailing up the Hudson River, and they were like, "Oh, that's the the Devil's River." Actually, I'm sorry. I think it's not the Devil's River, but it's where Wappinger Falls is to this day, where Wappinger Falls and Hudson River, where those two rivers meet. That's where these indigenous people were seen, and now that place has the name Devil something. I don't remember whether it's Tower or Island or something like that. But yeah, this is a kind of strange thing that happened with their culture. It kind of got mystified, but it did get demonicized in a way. Like everything was demonic, and they didn't understand what they were worshiping, like these stone idols, right? They called them idolatrous because they were worshiping stone idols. But what's really interesting is that these Godstones, as indigenous people called them, or Manitou, they were carved white quartz statues of like men and women, very rough statues. But the theory is like, well, where did these come from? I don't know whether they say the Native Americans worked them themselves, but it seems like they found stones that looked anthropomorphic already, and then maybe made some superficial adjustments to them, and then that was, it wasn't an idol, but it was the creator in nature, which is, in my opinion, what the whole spiritual culture and where the Shakers and the indigenous people intersect in a way is in that understanding of a real experience with the divine, a real connection to it. But to bring it back to Ezra Stiles, he was very interested in these idols, as he called them, and they took some of the Godstones. One that was found in Hartford, it was like 3 feet tall and about 1 foot wide, and it had like the kind of rough shape of like a head, shoulders, and kind of like hands and legs, So thus a man in a stone. And it's so interesting, because one of the things that you said, I don't remember if it was on the Higher Side Chats or just in one of your videos about Susquehanna, but you mentioned the Algonquin language having some similarities to Gaelic. Well, all of this stonework is very, very connected to the types of stone monuments and stone megaliths we see in Ireland, Scotland, and Great Britain, right? So, and that's not to say that, that's because white Irish people or Scottish people were here doing it and it wasn't the Native Americans, but you see sort of evidence for this kind of cross-pollination of culture much earlier than this colonial time that we have more records of.
Did you see, I sent you a link to a video this week. Did you see the video?
I did.
Oh, so the stone walls, the cairns.
Yes, that's exactly what is going on here in New England.
Correct.
And that's all up in the northern half of Pennsylvania for the most part, northern and eastern side, right? Yes.
And there was also, I remember they did some stones in Susquehanna County, which I thought was interesting because you just got that book.
Yeah, the 900-page centennial history of the Susquehanna County in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. So remind me to come back to the book because I want to say something on that. But, before we get too far off topic, but that's what's fun about this. So I want to kind of play around with some of these ideas, which we're kind of flirting around with right now. My personal opinion is like all of these indications of whether it's these stone walls and monuments which are found throughout the Northeast. These mysterious stone walls and monuments which are found throughout the Northeast. These the idols, the quartz carved statues that you were talking about, or even the similarities between the Gaelic language and Algonquin. I think, like, you know, it that points to like a bigger mystery. Like, you know, I still question everything that's told to us. So it's like, you know, going back to like, you know, cross-pollination, I think like maybe it was totally a different story all said and done, but I don't know. We don't know that yet. But where I want to go with this is there's lots of clues, and we can ascertain, and we can, like, you know, go and discover our own way. I think that's what we're doing. Like you with like the coming with like the ley lines and all this stuff that's going on. But I want to throw this out there. This is what I find this tickles me, so I'm curious if it's going to tickle you as well. So, are you familiar with Yale's motto?
I should be. No, tell me.
Well, it's in Latin. So, are you in front of your computer?
Yeah, I can look it up.
Why don't you pull that up? Why don't you pull that up real quickly? Cool. I think it's if you were to go on the Wikipedia page where they have like the little rectangle on the right-hand side, they list all the things. It's not their motto. It's what's written on their flag, which may be different than their motto. It might be that.
Is it Lux et Veritas?
Yeah, that's the motto. So that's like light is truth, I think. But on the flag, can you get a blow up of the flag? Yes. Expand the image?
Yes. Yeah, I have, I just picked up a book a month ago, and it's kind of like the controversial foundation of Yale and how they have, you know, some controversy about the real founders and who they were, because it is kind of an interesting story. They, you know, came from 2 towns over and chose Yale, and, you know, wanted to make this mystical college and all this stuff. But right. So what I think it's on the flag. What does it say on the flag? Let me see. It says Lux et Veritas, but then it has a book open with Hebrew.
It's got, okay, so I don't remember exactly how, because I'm going by memory, but there is a very, very direct link with Yale and their motto or their flag and what is it? The Urim and the Thummim. I might not be pronouncing that correctly. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say those 2 words? The URIM and the THUMMIM. So the first instance of this is in the Old Testament, and it is within the high priests, the Canaanite high priests. They had like a breastplate with all of these different sacred stones, you know, all these minerals, all these crystals. And you could always like read about the different stones which were on the high priest's chest breastplate. But they had 2 special stones, which are this Urim and Thummim. I always just think about it as Uma Thurman. Like in my mind, that's how I remember it. So I'm not, but it's got those letters. It's got like a URM, and you can go and find out all the information. But what they are, the most basic understanding of them is there's the white stone and the black stone, and they are used purely for divination purpose. And so this is like a very divinatory practice, like where you got like the white stone means yes and the black stone means no. And so the high priests were in communication with who they were communicating with, and they were getting their information through the stones. All right. And that is referenced in the Yale motto. Like that phrase may directly, I can't remember the specifics, but it's connected. And so the point being is, like, you know, you have this institution of higher rational thought, but it's really based upon like the opposite of it. And that's not to say that mysticism doesn't hold value. It's just that it is supposedly a different value system than, like, you know, the real rational, like, I'm going to demonstrate and prove and be able to prove things, as most institutions at that time were thought of doing. But as you're indicating, this was really based upon like more of a mystical outlet. And then you also have on the flag, you have the, God, I'm going to butcher this word as well, the tetra something gram. It's those 4 Hebrew letters. Do you see those?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is like that from
the tetragrammaton?
Yes, that's it. And that's the shorthand version of the 72-letter name of God, which you're not allowed to say, which is mirrored very much so in the Peacemaker. You're starting to see like these common stories, like, you know, and the question is like, you know, has this been astroturf? Have they put these stories there, or is this a universal truth? I don't know, but we can see that they're similar, and we'll go that. But we see that in Yale, and so where I'm going with this, like I'm going really 2 levels deeper. That was just the preface. So fast forward to Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, the place where we see the stones. And for the folks, like, Mark, if you could include that link in the show notes, like, it's a really interesting presentation done by like the Pennsylvania Waterkeepers Association, like really like environmentalist mindset, explaining these stone structures found throughout the Northeast Pennsylvania landscape, which they're saying like, yeah, we don't have any explanation. Like the native people say that this came before them. They don't know who built them. Like no one knows who built this sort of stuff. So it's like what we're saying is like really demonstratable. Like, you know, there's a lot of history here that we don't understand, no matter how we want to look at it. But if we can go with a very, very open eyes and like, you know, freeing ourselves of any story, like hopefully we'll navigate. So nonetheless, Susquehanna County, where you showed me, you got a book where we see these mysterious stones, this within the Church of the Latter-day Saints, you know, the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church is very, very significant. We just know that by the money they have, the widespread of their book, the fact that they go and they prophesize throughout the entire earth, and they own the most powerful genealogical database on the planet Earth. You know, that they, within their history or mythology or whatever you want to call it, their founder, Joseph Smith, used the white stone and the black stone. You know, this is their literature, the Urim and the Thummim, to go and translate the golden disc that he found, that he was given, which became the Book of Mormon. So now we have connected to this part of the world, like this location on the Susquehanna River where Joseph Smith lived. Like, you can go to it. I would highly recommend going to it if you haven't been there before. It's called the Restoration Site. It's run by the Mormon Church. You know, it's open all year round. Like, it's fantastic. Definitely go there and check it out. But this is where, you know, this white stone and black stone were said to be used. And within a lot of like discussion, like scholarly discussion on like what is the white stone or black stone, like assuming that it's a real powerful thing, like one of the common thoughts is that it's not necessarily like one white stone and one black stone, but it refers to any kind of white stone or special white stones and black stones which have this capability. So we know that, or within the history of the Mormon Church, that Joseph Smith used this white stone and black stone in order to translate this golden disc into the Book of Mormon. So now we're going to go one level deeper, because now we're looking at a white stone and a black stone. And, you know, for me, like, the story always goes back to like why the Susquehanna River in itself is very, very significant to all of the stories on life on Earth. And so now we're looking at a white stone and black stone. And if we look at the Susquehanna River Valley, there are 2 large deposits which are found in this river valley, mineral deposits which are not found anywhere else on Earth, or are found in much, much smaller or less pure, in less pure states. And so the first one being the Herkimer Diamond. And the Herkimer Diamond is a water clear quartz crystal, but it is naturally double terminated. That's what makes it so unique. It means it's got pointy sides on both ends. And 99.999% of all quartz, as it grows naturally, it grows perpendicular to the horizontal, or to the perpendicular to the plane of the earth. It grows out. There's a base, and then it grows up. So the base, where it grows from, whatever mineral it's growing upon, that is where it meets the earth, and then you get the point for where it grows up. Herkimer, or any naturally occurring double terminated quartz crystals, and not all double terminated quartz crystals are naturally occurring, but the naturally occurring ones, they're growing horizontally. So not to say like vertical is good or horizontal is better or anything like that. It's just about different and rarity of occurrence. So what we have in Herkimer, New York, which is probably 15 to 20 miles straight line to the source location of the Susquehanna River, is the only place where we find what are known as Herkimer diamonds, these water clear. So there are some places where there are a handful of other places on Earth where it's known that double terminated quartz crystals do occur, but they are not the ones which are unique to Herkimer. Are water clear, they're crystal clear, they look like, or at least they have the potential, not all of them, but they have the potential of being without any inclusions within them. They're naturally double terminated. They were found everywhere, maybe not so much anymore, but like at a point, like, you just go in any creek in this one place on Earth and you could just find these crystals. And another indication within the Herkimer diamond is that when you start to kind of move it around in your hand and reflect the light, there's this rainbow. There's a rainbow iridescence which begins to show inside of the crystal, which is not found in other quartz crystals. It's very rare. So it's a combination of this rarity, which really indicates that regardless of culture, regardless of value system, you're just walking around the earth and you see this is what a stone looks like. You'll be like, wow, this is special. This is unique. This is valuable. This is something. So we have that at the source location of the Susquehanna River. And then midway from Cooperstown, New York to Sunbury, Pennsylvania, which is where Edison built his first 3-wire distribution plant, where the North Branch and the West Branch come together. Like right around there is where we have Scranton, New York. Or Scranton, Pennsylvania, excuse me. And beneath Scranton is the largest deposit of anthracite in the entire, known in all of Earth. Like anthracite is a coal. It is the rarest of coal. It is the purest of coal, meaning it is almost 98% to 99.999% carbon. If it was 100%, it would be graphite, which is different. But this anthracite is the graphite does not burn, but anthracite will. It is a mineral which burns, which is what the definition of coal is, and it's the purest form. And only 2% of all coal on Earth is this very pure anthracite, and 98% of all of that anthracite is found right there in Scranton, and it is jet black. So without getting into like what anthracite is, it's incredibly unique. It's different than other black stones in the fact that it burns and they do not. And then we have this very, very unique white crystal clear Herkimer diamond, and right in between the two, probably like 50 miles upstream and 50 miles downstream, is where Joseph Smith used the white stone and the black stone to be able to go and connect with whatever it is he connected with. The story is like, these stones are very powerful, and they are found in a natural, unique abundance in this mysterious part of the earth. And all around it is where you're finding all of these very significant ley lines and very significant parts of the American, like, pre-colonial history.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's funny, I don't know if we touched on this at all on this show, but Connecticut used to have a land claim going all the way west into Pennsylvania and what is now like northern Pennsylvania and like kind of central New York. There was this kind of dispute, and that's why down in Wilkes-Barre, a place where I happen to go through, before we first met, there was that Connecticut colony that I stumbled upon, and I was kind of like, wow, I come all the way here and I find this reminder of home. But yeah, it is an extremely significant area, and wow, I'm wondering.
Well, I just want to be clear. We're talking about the exact same place. You're talking about, it's called 40 Fort. Whatever, like, it's called 40 Fort, right? So that's where this Connecticut company came. They came to 40 Fort. They founded 40 Fort, which predates Wilkes-Barre, which predates Scranton. Wilkes-Barre and Scranton are like, 10 miles apart. This is the same area. This is on top of this swath of anthracite deposit is maybe like 30, 40 miles long. It's this real skinny deposit beneath the earth of this incredibly rare black stone that will light on fire. Other stones do not light on fire. It is a different substance. Like, we limit what it is by thinking about it as a fossil fuel. But when you go to the deeper level, like, this is a very, very special thing. The Connecticut folks, that's where they came. This is what they laid claim to. This is what they fought for.
Right. And those Connecticut folks were from New Haven, the New Haven colony, because at that time there was 2 colonies in the area now known as Connecticut. There was what was then like Hartford County, and now sort of like the northern half of Connecticut was one colony called the Connecticut colony. And then there was New Haven colony, which was the shore, New Haven, which was originally named by the Dutch for the 2 red sort of mountains on either side of this river mouth, the Quinnipiac River that we talked about last week. And yeah, so it's interesting that this colony has its connections in New Haven, where Yale is born, and down there in Pennsylvania, not only in that area, but also in Philadelphia. They had a land claim down in Philadelphia in the area that became kind of like the main part of town in Philadelphia, right? So yeah, you see this theme, and it's funny because Ross Ben, when I met him in Pennsylvania or in Philadelphia, and he toured us around Wissahickon Creek, he asked me, what's the Connecticut mystery? And each week talking to you, I feel like it's coming together more and more. And when you said the thing about the tetragrammaton, I'm looking at the seal of Yale University, because I couldn't find any flags that had anything with like more words than lux et veritas, but there is a seal that says sigil cal Yalen nove port nove angle, right? So I don't speak Latin, but when you said tetragrammaton, another synchronicity there, because I listened to your conversation with Chance Garton. You guys did a podcast a while back about the Tao of multidimensional creativity. That's how he titled the episode. And you guys were talking about the I Ching. And I thought to myself, I don't have a card deck. I don't have an I Ching card deck. I should go look for one. And I couldn't find one, but instead I bought this this deck called the Rota Mundi Tarot. And wow, it's incredible, because the third, the 4 of Pentacles is the Tetragrammaton, and this whole book basically breaks down the Kabbalah and the tarot, and uses the card deck rather as a instructional tool instead of just a divinatory tool. So this week I bought a very deep divinatory tool, and here we are talking about Joseph Smith divining things with the black and the white stone. This tarot deck is all about the Kabbalah, and very interesting how they use the trump cards and kind of show the Kabbalistic meaning behind the trump cards. And then there's sort of like the Rosicrucian alchemical wedding encoded in like the wands cards. I'm sorry, not the wands, the cups, and then in the swords as well. And then the pentacles break down all the different seals, like the Seal of Solomon, the Pentagrammaton, the Tetragrammaton, the three pillars. So it's really more of a instructional tool than a proper tarot card deck, but you can use it for both. And yeah, I'm only starting to dig into this.
All right. So let me say a couple things. So let me first read this from YaleNews.com. If you've gathered this much wisdom, then it probably does not escape you that our school motto is Urim and Thummim, which is Hebrew for lux et veritas, which in turn is Latin for light and truth. Emblazoned on the Yale seal are these two ancient words. So that's where it was. So that is the connection. So you mentioned that the company that went to and lay claim in Pennsylvania, they were part of the New Haven colony, correct?
Yeah.
So the New Haven colony, at least to this date, is probably best known, or arguably best known, is for Yale University, because that's what happened there, right? That's its biggest mark on the world, if you could say. And that's a pretty big mark for an institution.
Yes, and also I will say it's the place where the three judges who killed Charles I were led by Iroquois people to safe harbor in New Haven on those mounds I was talking about. The Dutch called them red mounds. They're mountains.
Right, but from a consciousness, a cultural awareness perspective, like if that were going to be like the question, like for all the people in the world, like it'll be Yale. And so what I'm getting at is like there is this connection between twice now from it kind of triangulates between that location, those people, the founding of that institution, the idea of a white stone and a black stone, and then coming to like way before Joseph Smith. Coming to this area, whether purposefully or not, with this black stone. Then Joseph Smith, in that same general area on the same river, is then use a black stone. Like you begin to see, like the link is really, really deep. Mm-hmm. And so, like the point is, like you definitely got to what is anthracite? What is anthracite? Like those sort of questions. And I will also say that they are framing this up in a Kabbalistic perspective. That's not to say the Kabbalistic perspective is bad or good. It's just like that is that perspective. And you could see like Yale, the fact that it also has not just like the white stone and black stone as their motto, but they have on their seal, they have that Kabbalistic 70 or abbreviation for the 72 lettered word or name of God. And so it's like we can see all of that, but we can also go a level deeper and go and work with the substance ourselves. So I don't want to go and discount or at least be a little bit more clear, like just because these links were laid to these things, just like how you're saying, an area which seemingly is charged for whatever reason had been deemed the devil's den. We could get rid of all of those sort of names, and we could go and experience those locations and free ourselves from any sort of initial frame of reference to understand what's happening here, or even use those frame of references with the knowledge and understanding that it's just a frame of reference and it's not the only one.
Right.
So I just want to point out all of that. And what I was thinking about, which is kind of funny, and I want to throw this out there, and this is a good way to counterbalance. You just talked all about that the tarot deck, which you just got, and I'll just share kind of my perspective and take it for whatever it's worth. Like I like the tarot. The tarot is a very, very established language mystical language in, human consciousness. Like just the number of people who have studied it, who understood that these symbols or these cards mean this basic sort of archetype. Like there's a lot of mental energy that has gone to it. And so, that comes with both, like a real wealth and foundation, but then it also comes with, like anything, with established understanding. Like it comes with limitation. So what I think is a really neat thing to do is then counter using those type of tools with something which is true to just purely you. And I was thinking about this when you first started talking about the books. This is the idea that popped in my mind in the very beginning of this conversation about how, particularly now that you and Tara are co-joined, that you're having this special sort of like connection with books. I would then go and utilize everything about these books. Like, that is your unique repository of the information of, like, your divination tool. And then I would make my own cards. I mean, it could be as simple as just getting like a whole bunch of 3x5 index cards, or you could be a little bit more creative if you want to. You just want to be uniform. And then you start coming up with a system, like with the titles of the books. So that now that as you're building all of these books, like, now you have like a way to go and tap into a book and then maybe include in this system, like chapter numbers or like numbers, like, which would point you. So you can start pulling from books, like pulling a card for where am I going to find the information which I need from that book itself, or from and then you'll have like some sort of like indication, like with numbers, which might get you there. That's why I said like chapters or page numbers. It's got to be something which is going to be universal true for all the books. So like one book is only like 70 pages. You can't have like page 72 or like 372 in it, because it wouldn't make sense. But if you came up with something which was very
I see where you're going, and
so this becomes your system. So it's like you counterplay like established systems, which have their strengths and minuses, but they're really, their strengths are like it's really well established, and so you can go and like really get into what other people have thought about it as you work your way with it, and you counter that with your own, like, this is my system and it's only true to me because of my actual experiences, like include in those books, like, oh wow, like this is where we got that book. So it's like that part of the world, and this is what happened on that trip. Like all of that becomes like, it is a truth. You had that experience. You know that it means that because you know it. And now you have something which is like pure and true just to you guys. And that to me is immensely powerful in this time too.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I bought the deck, essentially to be another book in my collection, because it is such a cool learning tool, and it is like, researching all this stuff and kind of resting on the shoulders of guys like you and Ross Ben. And, it's pretty prevalent, the Rosicrucian, Freemason, Kabbalistic symbolism. So I felt like having this would be a nice resource to be able to examine the things that are more, encoded, and be able to go back to this deck and be like, oh, see, okay, maybe this is a metaphor for something larger, and it kind of reminds me of this card here, that kind of thing. So, but I love the idea of creating my own sort of like Dewey Decimal divination system. I think that should be like a product, the Dewey Decimal divination tool.
Well, I mean, I talked about this a little bit in the beginning of our conversation about when we're talking about the wheel, and what I was hoping to spell out was recognizing the difference between infrastructure of a system and then unique ways in which that infrastructure can be used And I think a lot of times when we learn infrastructure, we learn it with a meaning set, and we just assume they're the same. But once you can begin to separate the two, then you can become more creative yourself. And I think this idea, particularly to anyone who, like, whether, you want to use the word divination or whether you want to use the word mysticism or what have you, but anyone who wants to at least reference non-linear information gathering. I mean, that's what it is. Like, that doesn't say it's right or wrong. It's just saying it's non-linear, and I find it like a fun and exciting and incredibly human way of experiencing life. The best way to do it and the truest way to do it is to develop your own, which is unique to yourself. And it's also, and I like to share that. I like to, encourage people, like, you go and you do that. And then it also becomes, though, a gift to other people, just as what Roz was asking you, what's the Connecticut mystery? Learning other people, experiencing other people's divination systems, because every divination system is a language, and every language is limited. There's no two languages that are able to express everything in all the same ways. That's not a limitation of languages. It's just what they are. And so the divination languages are limited to what the qualities associated with the tools are. For example, like tarot, those, the 72 cards of tarot, I think it's 72, 22 plus 78, I think 78 cards of tarot. They have an established meaning set. So you go and you mix it up with other cards, which have different meaning sets. But when you develop your own, it's completely unique to you. And so I want to go and just share the story, and then as an example. So I used to do these things. I used to go to festivals, and I would set up in a tent, and I'd call it the shadow tent, and I would give stone readings, and they were just stones I collected on my journey. And I would have people come in, and I would have them throw the stones or arrange them any way they like. But I would then go and read their sculpture, whatever their arrangement of stones, based upon what those stones meant to me. And so no other human being in the world could ever know what those stones meant, because they didn't have my experience, or they would have their own different definition. And, regardless of whatever I said to these people, whether it was accurate or not, that's irrelevant. We love stories. And when we hear other people's perspectives and other people's stories, and we hear it from their language set, their perspective, their unique way, well, then that's a friggin' gift. You get to share that. And so I guess that's the sum total, or the return to where the story began, recommending you maybe with your books, but whatever it is that you're creating your life, as you begin to develop the system, and then as you begin to then share that, once you become more comfortable using it within yourself, in your own life, you can begin to share that with other people. I see that as a very important currency of the coming future.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can see it happening, especially with the folks who reach out on the show, all the channels that they can get in touch with me. A lot of times they'll ask for a book recommendation, and I remember being in that same position where I loved looking for books, but you can only go so far to find the books that are available in your used bookstore before you feel because I'm the type of person, I like to have an intuitive feeling behind a purchase, especially a book. And I think you're very similar. When you told us about the Canifest, you were I'm not going to buy just any old thing at a kind of arts and crafts festival. It's got to call out to me, and that one particular craft that came from a region of the world where you visited in Peru, spoke to you, right? That's the same thing that I think has happened to me over and over with books. So, when people do ask me for a recommendation, I'm almost well, yeah, first you got to go, to a used bookstore and see what calls to you. But, once you get past that level, I'm remembering a point in my life where I was like, okay, now I gotta like search on the internet or search out, and this was probably before podcasts, around the time, not before podcasts existed, but before podcasts existed to me, right? So I wasn't aware of them, but I was aware of the Joseph Campbell series of lectures that were available on Spotify at that point in time. I don't think they are anymore. So I was like, okay, there are other people out there that I can learn from on the internet. And I started looking for podcasts, and then through podcasting, certain people would just come to the fray, and that's how I would order a book. I would listen to an interview, and then there we go. This guy sounds interesting. Let me get his book, right? So that's kind of, it would be really cool going along the line of thinking that you just brought to my awareness here to create some kind of like, at least like a divination tool of authors and their works, like I can already kind of see it together. But, for my own lens, I don't know, that I feel like right now I kind of just exposed one of my just how I think, because I'm realizing like I'm already going against what you said. You said make something personal that I can use, and I'm already thinking like, oh, how can I make something that other people can use? Like, no, I should definitely, because I still have a lot of learning to do, really, myself before I can go and teach other people. And it would be, a good way to pick a book, because sometimes, I'm sure you feel this way when you have a lot of books to look through. It's sometimes hard to pick, which one you're going to get into at that moment in time, unless there's that, synchronicity behind it. But
so, a whole bunch of things you just said. So, so the first thing is recognizing that you have a special way with books. All right.
Okay.
Like that's your experience. Like, is that not your experience? I'm not saying this compared to anyone else. I'm just saying with you, like you got a special thing. Like I know that about Mark. I know Mark's got a special thing with books. And I know I try to find out what people have a special thing with every person I meet with. We all have special things. So like kind of sit with that for a little bit. Like, you probably don't think that way at first of yourself. Maybe you do, but like recognizing like that's like, one of your attributes. That's one of your gifts, if you will. And gifts are meant to be given. So what could be fun, like, to, is, and maybe this bridges what you're saying, because I think there are two things which are possible here. One being like, you sharing your technique just as an infrastructure. This is how I do it, so that people can go and like, oh, okay, I'm going to approach my life inspired by that. Like I try to do that a lot, like, with the rights of the 40th parallel, talking about like different practices. It's all meant like, it's playful. We're meant to be playful and experimental people, and it's meant to be personal. So, so you can teach that. Like, there's a value to that, but sometimes people don't want to go and learn that. They're like, well, books don't speak to me. It's like, I recognize the importance of books, but I'm looking for some guidance. So this would be an interesting thing. You come up with like whatever your number is. Maybe it's 15, maybe it's your top 10 books, maybe it's top 10 authors, and you've got like these cards that you've made. And so when someone's like, hey, Mark, where should I go? What should I read now? Like, what direction? Because I know people are coming to you that way. Because we're all somewhere on a continuum where we're teachers and students. You could go and like real quickly, like not have to think it through. Like, well, I think you might this, but you got to read that. You just go to your book cards and be like, okay, let me give you a quick book reading. You pull your cards and then you just tell them about those books and you read them in that direction. Like, you pick one of the book titles. Like that would be, I think that's another one of the gifts, because again, we got to start thinking about our value to the community outside of, right now we're doing it in parallel with technology, but then also things which are completely untechnology. You could say, well, you still need to get the book. That's okay. That's up on that person. Now they've got like a mission. But like that is like as just an idea of like how because I can hear it in your voice. You want to interact and help and be and fit in as a service to the community, and that's a very human thing. We all, I feel that. We all feel that to different degrees, and that's strong within you. So I find that like real exciting. Like I love we can see with all of the stuff which we were talking about of divination and being connected with the natural world, but then also being able to have some sort of means of having like a more concrete conversation. And that's what these divination arts are. And particularly when you create your own natural ones with whatever natural to you, that is you having that communication.
Right. Right on. Yeah, I definitely have a lot of crafts on my list to make. The map making that I think we even had the map in the trunk when we visited. But yeah, that's a part of it too, like mapping out the journey. And one thing that Tara and I kind of thought of in sync was like a map that you can use to show where you've been, kind of like a storybook fairy tale type map where it's like, well, this is who I was in this part of my life, so I'm going to draw like this kind of landscape, and you can kind of connect like the path, and it really just is like a reflecting tool, like an art, just like your story in almost like a little map, like this is where I've been, this is where I am now, and this is where I'm going. You're nailing it. Like what you're describing, that's exactly, that's bringing your story to life, if you will, your story based upon your actual experiences, like, that's breaking out. And so when you take your story and it's no longer just in your head and you're representing it in this different way. And you guys, I love your map. I think you're right on. You should have like a book where every place, because you guys travel a good amount, sketch out your maps there. Just sketch them out. What I think would be really cool is if you did like kind of a bigger map at some point, and like, let's say it's of like the Northeast or maybe just New England, and you put in all of the natural formations that you want to put in, because I know that you are good at drawing those and with the animals, and then you include all the used bookstores you've been to. That would be, yeah.
Right. So you got like all of this like natural sort of thing. You've got all of that, and then you've linked it into those bookstores. And now it's kind of like it bridges the world. And if you had cards, like, there's so many things, like, this gaming way, like, part of, I think what is so important, particularly coming up, but just to be human, is like to live a game. And we can see that with the rise and popularity of video games, weaponized gaming. But you can turn like that basic infrastructure into creating like this beautiful life of meaning.
Right.
And it's fun and it's adventurous, and you share it with people and you leave a record.
Yeah. And then, it's at a time where, and Tara tells me this all the time, like, oh, you're doing so great. Like everything's going amazing with your podcast. And not that like I need any reminder of that. Like, I'm very happy and confident, but I think, she compares herself to me a lot because, she wants to start a podcast, but she also kind of wants to really, I think, through a podcast possibly connect with her higher purpose. And that's been really bothering her over the past few weeks is like, how am I gonna, strive like he is? Because she sees me, talking to people on my podcast and feels, kind of left out in a way. And I'm like, well, you have to go at your own pace, and you know what you know, so be confident in it and start from there and connect with the people you want to connect with. And she's definitely doing that. But I think, gamifying it has made it fun for both of us, and that's why we do like going on journeys. And I remind her, like, you're just as much a part of this as I am, even though I might be able to recall the information right on the spot, and like sometimes I can't, but she very fondly looks up to me as like smarter than her, and I try to remind her, like, no, we're equals. Like, I may be intelligent in these areas, but you're just as intelligent in your own way. So I don't know, getting a little more personal, it's like that's kind of why right now what you just said is super exciting. I don't think she's here right now, but yeah, when she gets back, I definitely want to tell her about that, because she and I definitely enjoy working on the maps together. But the card game, that could be fun, because she's a reader too. She definitely reads a lot, and that game could be good for both of us.
But then also, like, this idea of, and I get it. It's the quote unquote, it's the real world, but framing up the game in the like the context of like, for the example you use, like a podcast. That is framing her definition of success is based upon a game she did not create. And you can see that that's causing internal strife. Otherwise, she wouldn't feel a certain way. So, like, when we begin to play outside of the framework which was given, you free yourself up. That doesn't mean you don't go back into the framework, but you go outside of it and you create it on your own terms, as opposed to like trying to mold oneself. I mean, that's been the whole thing for 100 years now, ever since they started once they started creating the corporate environment, that people left their home and they had to go and work someone else's job in someone else's framework that way. But yeah, that would be, I would imagine, would at least open up new possibilities, which would be more empowering.
Right.
If she doesn't feel empowered using that, it's probably because it's not. I don't ever feel empowered using like the technology. I'm so resistant to it. And, figuring out like that midline at this point of like where I want to participate and how I don't want to participate. But the real thing is it's got to be like completely yours and completely not dependent upon their system. But then also being able to intermingle if it needs to with that system. That would be what I would suggest would be a really good model to follow.
Yeah, it's definitely, I agree with you in a lot of ways with what you just said, but I feel like, and I think you'll agree with what I'm about to say too, it's like we're drawing on skills that we've gained outside of podcasting. Like, you and I didn't become communicators because we, like, when we were young men, we're like, oh, one day I'm going to be on a podcast. Like, that is just a part of our personality. We're good at communicating things that we're knowledgeable of, things we've researched, things we've experienced, right? And for me, it didn't bring me anywhere for the longest time, because I was reading books and listening to podcasts and telling coworkers or friends about this stuff, and it was falling on deaf ears, as they say, and hence the name of my podcast. My family thinks I'm crazy because they too had those deaf ears. So it was kind of like a relief to be embraced in the podcasting world with the kind of speed that I was embraced. I unlike many podcasters, I kind of got jumped right into it pretty quickly, being on Sam Tripoli's podcast as like one of my first podcasts. So that, that kind of pushed me into the bigger stage a little quicker than I would have been. And I thought to myself, well, it's, not really a big deal, because all podcasting is an expression of your voice and your mind. And I've been expressing my voice and my mind for my whole life, so it's just, to me, the hardest part, like you said, was kind of mitigating the technology side of it. Like, how am I going to actually connect with people? Who am I going to connect with? How much am I going to connect with them? And like, am I going to do it over video, audio? I prefer audio. The way we're doing it now, I've kind of grown to like it. Now this is the 7th episode of Your Handbook for the Apocalypse. It's definitely, also kind of goes into the reason why I'm so motivated to even read these books and listen to these podcasts. It's not because I'm just like entertained by mysticism and conspiracy theory. It's because deep down in my heart, I've always felt like there is a larger mystery that needs to at least be exposed, if not, figured out in some way. And, that mystery has led me to realize so many things that I don't agree with in the world, and that makes me want to express myself even more, so that maybe the world will change for the better, because there are so many things that could be different for the better. I don't know, and I've always like looked towards the contrary side of things for those answers, which has led me to alternative history and conspiracy theory, and then the occult and alchemy and all these other routes that the average person might not take. And I found like the average person in this podcasting realm does take those routes. So it, feel quite at home here.
No, without a doubt. This is where we've all got an opportunity to meet each other.
Yeah. So that being said, I mean, it's like, and she's no different. Like she's not new to this stuff. She's experienced strange things in her life and has sought out this type of wisdom and knowledge. So I always encourage her, like, yeah, you could do a podcast. You'd be great at it. Just, so I think there is that sort of, thing for me where I'm like, I can only teach so much before I'm like pressuring somebody to do something, and in my experience, my past experience, if you pressure somebody to do something, they resist, so with that being said, I kind of I'm like, all right, you fly out of the nest now, you can do this, because I don't really know any other way. But bringing it back to the gaming thing, I see like when we do stuff like that, where it's not about outcomes, it's not about accomplishing something, it's just about having fun or going on a journey or expressing ourselves, that's when she tunes into really who she is. And I think that could be like, I don't know, that's my thought, is how do you make that into a podcast, like, so I wanted to record on the road. It's just difficult to like kind of record a podcast when you're in the moment and you're driving around, you're just in the moment, in the
moments where the gold is.
Right.
That's a lot of good stuff. That's a lot of good stuff, Mark. So where are we right now? We're about 2 hours. Are we 2 hours in?
Yeah, about an hour 40 in.
An hour 40 in. Is there anything else we want to discuss before we start wrapping up?
No, I was looking through the emails to see if we had anything new. But other than that one that I forwarded to you, which I don't know if it was explicitly a message for the show, there weren't any other sort of messages for the Your Handbook for the Apocalypse podcast. So reach out to us, folks, mfticpodcast@gmail.com or podinbox.com/mftic if you want to ask us a question or leave us a message. Did you get that? Did you get the email that I forwarded to you, Mike?
I got the email you forwarded to me with the guy from Tennessee who spent time in Tennessee.
Right.
Yes, definitely so. And I hope to get some more emails. I love to hear from see what people have to say. And I'm thinking about your comment about not wanting to pressure anyone. So we don't want to pressure anyone to send us an email. But I think what we can do to people, for people, and this is true for all of us, is no one ever likes to be pressured, but everyone likes to be inspired, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I would say that's the flip side. The flip side of the pressure duality is the inspired duality. And so if we have inspired anyone to want to go and send us a message, I would love to hear any sort of comments.
Right on. And I'm sure Tara will have something to say because she does listen to this, and I don't know. I think she'll appreciate being mentioned. Only nice things were said, but
we always talk about Tara on the show.
she always listens, so.
As she should. Well, all right, Mark, this was another good one.
Cool, man. All right. Well, we'll talk soon, and thank you again for listening to your Handbook for the Apocalypse. Remember, if you're listening on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast feed, go over and subscribe to the Susquehanna Alchemy podcast feed, and we'll see you next week.